She lived in a small apartment on the top floor of a faded brick building, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the pipes groaned with every step. Outside, the city hummed with life, buses rumbled, people shouted to each other, and car horns pierced the air. Inside, she liked the quiet. It was her refuge. She would sit on the worn sofa, the cushions flattened from years of use, and imagine herself somewhere else, somewhere bigger, somewhere brighter. Music was her escape. It wasn't something she shared with anyone. It was hers alone, a secret world she could enter whenever the world outside felt too heavy. During the day, she worked at a small cafe. It was not a fancy place, but it paid the bills. She moved behind the counter with practiced ease, carrying plates of food, filling cups of coffee, and wiping down tables that had already seen too many people and too many crumbs. The regular customers barely noticed her, and the new ones rarely paid attention. Some smiled politely, some didn't smile at all. To the outside world, she was just another person doing a job, another face in a sea of faces. But inside, she carried a song she hadn't yet shared with anyone. Her mornings started early. She would wake up before the sun, the city still half asleep, and make herself a small breakfast. She liked her toast a little burnt and her tea strong. After eating, she would sit by the window with a notebook. It wasn't a notebook for work or bills, but a notebook for music. She would hum quietly, writing down melodies that came to her like whispers. Sometimes, she would close her eyes and let her hands move over the old piano in the corner. The keys were a little sticky, the pedals squeaked, but when she played, it didn't matter. The world disappeared. For a moment, she felt free. At the cafe, the work was simple but tiring. Orders came and went like a river, and she moved with the current, careful not to spill, careful not to break the rhythm. Customers came with smiles, complaints, laughter, or silence. Some asked for complicated drinks, others for plain coffee. She never let them see how exhausted she sometimes felt. She wore a gentle smile, the kind that made people feel like they were in the right place, even if they weren't. Behind that smile, though, was a mind always thinking about music. She imagined how a song could turn the rush of the city into a dance, how a melody could make a stranger feel at home. Her colleagues were kind enough, but they didn't understand her. They joked about the things she liked, sometimes teasing her for humming quietly while cleaning, or for disappearing into the corner to scribble in her notebook. She laughed with them because she didn't want to seem fragile, but inside every joke cut a little deeper. They didn't know that she dreamed of more, that she imagined stages and audiences, that she could feel a song before it existed. She kept these thoughts close, wrapped around her heart like a warm scarf, because the world outside wasn't ready for them. In her free time, she would wander the streets after work. The city at night was different. It was softer, quieter. Streetlights painted pools of gold on the sidewalks, and the air smelled of coffee and rain and distant food trucks. She would watch the people passing by, imagining what their lives were like, imagining what songs would tell their stories. She often thought about the piano she had left behind at her childhood home, the one she hadn't played in years. She missed the feel of the keys under her fingers, the way sound could rise from silence and fill a room. She dreamed of playing again, letting the music she carried inside her breathe out into the world. She had always been careful about her dreams. People around her often laughed at what they called childish hopes. Friends, neighbors, even distant relatives had once made comments. Some cruel, some careless, about how she should focus on work, on practicality, on being realistic. She learned to keep her music hidden, to play only in moments no one could see. She learned to smile at the jokes, to nod when people said she couldn't do more. But each laugh, each comment, each doubt only made the music inside her grow louder. She wanted to prove that what she loved, what she felt, had value. She wanted to show the world that it was not foolish to chase something that made the heart sing. Her evenings were her own. She would make a small dinner, sometimes leftovers from the cafe, sometimes something simple she had bought herself. She liked to eat while listening to old records, or humming quietly to herself. The apartment was small, but it was her sanctuary. She could move around freely, play her melodies, write her songs, and let her imagination run wild. Sometimes she would close her eyes and pretend the city outside didn't exist, that the people who laughed and doubted her weren't there. She would imagine a room filled with light, with people who were listening, truly listening. To the music she carried, despite the quiet, she wasn't lonely. She had small joys. A barista at a nearby cafe who remembered her order, a neighbor who waved politely, a street musician who played guitar near the train station. She watched them and thought about their stories. She imagined how their lives could be told in notes and rhythms. Music was her way of understanding the world, a language she used to translate everything she saw and felt, even the smallest things: a dripping faucet, a bus that honked too loudly. A stray cat on the sidewalk could become part of a song if she listened closely enough. She kept a journal too, not just for music but for thoughts and memories. She wrote about her day, about the customers who smiled, the moments that felt heavy, the little victories she had quietly achieved. Writing helped her make sense of life. Helped her remember that even though the world seemed small and dismissive, she had a voice that mattered. Her journal was filled with sketches of melodies, scribbled lyrics, and short stories about people she had seen. Each page was a step closer to the dream she carried, a reminder that even small steps mattered. There were moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if her dreams were foolish, if her music would ever be heard. She remembered the laughter, the raised eyebrows, the whispered comments that said she should focus on something else. Those thoughts were heavy, but she refused to let them win. She reminded herself of the joy music brought her, of the way it made her feel alive. She reminded herself that the first note she played, whenever it happened, would be hers and hers alone. A declaration of everything she had held inside her life, though ordinary to some, was full of quiet battles and hidden victories. Every day she faced the world with a gentle smile, carrying a secret strength. Every note she hummed, every melody she scribbled, was a testament to her resilience. She moved through the city, the cafe, and her small apartment with a rhythm only she could feel, a rhythm that no one else understood. But that was okay. One day, she told herself, the world would understand, even if just for a moment. One day someone would hear her first note, and it would carry everything she had ever felt, everything she'd ever dreamed, into the hearts of those who had doubted her. Until that day, she continued quietly. She cleaned tables, brewed coffee, wrote music, and watched the city with attentive eyes. Every step, every action, every note she hummed was part of a larger story. A story of a woman who refused to let laughter define her, who refused to let doubt drown her dreams. In the silence of her apartment, in the calm of early mornings, in the bustle of the cafe, she nurtured her secret world, waiting patiently for the moment when it would burst into reality. When the first note would finally shock everyone and show them what they had been missing all along, the cafe was busier than usual that afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust in golden beams. She moved between tables, carrying plates and cups, smiling politely at the customers who barely noticed her. She liked watching people, observing their movements, the way they laughed, the way they frowned. Each person was a story, each story a song waiting to be written. She hummed quietly under her breath as she worked, letting her mind wander into melodies. Careful that no one could hear, her colleagues were chatting in the back, joking about the customers and the long line forming at the counter. They laughed easily, voices loud and familiar. She sometimes joined in, mostly to blend in, but her heart wasn't really in the jokes. She was always half in another world, thinking about the music she would play later when she was alone that day. A group of new customers came in, and the cafe hummed with their chatter. They were young, confident, laughing among themselves, paying little attention to anything around them. One of them noticed her quietly humming as she cleaned a table and tilted their head, curiosity mixed with amusement. They whispered to each other, their eyes on her, smirking. "Do you actually play something, or are you just humming for fun?" One of them asked, loud enough that she heard. The others laughed, thinking it was a joke. She paused for a moment, unsure if she should answer. Her fingers tightened around the cloth she was using to wipe the table. The sound of laughter, though friendly in their eyes, made her stomach tighten. She had learned to expect this kind of reaction. People rarely believed in what they could not see. They rarely took her seriously. Her mind raced. She could ignore it, pretend not to hear, continue cleaning, but a quiet voice inside her urged her to speak up. She had spent years practicing, dreaming, imagining this exact moment, not to prove them wrong, but to show them something they had never understood. She took a deep breath, trying to steady harassing heart. The cafe seemed too quiet for a moment, the background noise fading in her mind, as if the world itself was holding its breath. One of her colleagues noticed the tension, tried to make a joke to break the moment. But the group of customers was persistent. They were enjoying themselves, unaware of the storm building quietly inside her. They challenged her, half teasing, half daring her to show what she could do. Their laughter was playful, but it had a sharp edge that pricked at her confidence. She smiled faintly, keeping her composure, and nodded. As if agreeing to the unspoken dare, she moved to the corner where an old upright piano had been placed for display. No one had paid much attention to it in years, but she had always admired its worn keys. They were slightly chipped, the wood scratched from decades of use, but she could see the life inside them. She sat down slowly, her hands resting on her lap for a moment, gathering herself. The cafe had grown quiet, the line of customers still waiting, some watching curiously. She could feel eyes on her now, waiting, expecting nothing. Yet somehow sensing that something was about to happen, her fingers hovered over the keys. The memories of late nights, of secret practice sessions, of melodies written in her notebook, all came rushing back. She remembered the early mornings, the solitude, the small apartment filled with scribbled notes and half-played songs. She remembered the laughter of others who doubted her, the comments that said she should be practical, the times she had been told to focus on work and forget her dreams. Each memory fueled her, not with anger but with quiet determination. This was her moment. The first note would carry all of it. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Some people exchanged glances, unsure what she was about to do. A few whispered among themselves, curiosity growing. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second and let her hands rest gently on the keys. She felt the texture, the coolness of the ivory, the smooth resistance. Then, with a deep, steady breath, she pressed down a single key. The sound rang out, pure and clear, cutting through the ambient noise of the cafe. Conversations stopped abruptly. Even the dishwasher in the back seemed to pause mid-motion. People turned, eyes widening, mouths opening slightly in surprise. It was a sound that seemed too big, too beautiful, too perfect to come from such an ordinary place. Her first note held weight, a quiet power that drew everyone's attention. It was simple, but it was precise. It carried the essence of every moment she had spent dreaming, practicing, imagining. For a moment, no one moved. The laughter that had filled the cafe moments ago was gone. Only the note lingered, vibrating softly in the air, touching each listener without them knowing why. It was a sound that demanded attention, not with force, but with truth. The group of young customers who had laughed before were now silent, their expressions shifting from amusement to astonishment. They had expected nothing, and now they had received something beyond their understanding. She continued to play, each note flowing naturally into the next. Her fingers moved with confidence, drawing out melodies she had created in her private world. There was no showiness, no attempt to impress. Each note was a story, a piece of her life, a reflection of the years she had spent unseen, unheard, underestimated. The cafe transformed. Tables became invisible, chairs disappeared, and all that remained was the music and the people who were listening. Finally listening, some people in the cafe felt tears prick at their eyes, though they did not know why. They had seen her countless times before, as part of the background, as someone ordinary. Yet here she was, commanding the room with something so pure and undeniable. Her colleagues looked on, stunned. The regular customers who had passed by without a second glance now leaned forward, captivated. Everyone, in that moment, shared a singular experience, the realization that they had misjudged her, that they had laughed too soon, that they had missed the story that was right in front of them. Her heart raced, but not from fear. It raced with exhilaration, with the joy of finally being able to express what had been buried inside for so long. Each key she pressed, each note she played, was a small victory over doubt and laughter, a declaration that her music had value. She did not play for applause or recognition. She played because it was her truth, because it was the only way she could breathe fully, completely. In a world that often overlooked her, the group of customers who had teased her earlier were now quiet, watching in awe. They had expected a joke, a stumble, maybe a small tune at best. Instead, they witnessed someone who had taken every small humiliation, every whispered doubt, every laugh directed at her, and transformed it into something extraordinary. They shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with their own assumptions. Realizing that the world could surprise them in ways they had never imagined, time seemed to stretch. The cafe, once filled with the hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes, was now wrapped in the music she created. People listened without speaking, without moving, captivated by the depth and beauty of what they were hearing. Some felt their hearts swell, some felt memories awaken, and some simply stared. Unable to comprehend the source of this unexpected brilliance, it was not the technique alone, nor the complexity of the notes, but the honesty, the raw emotion, the authenticity that made each sound resonate. She did not rush. Each note was carefully placed, each melody allowed to breathe. The music told a story, not just of talent, but of resilience, of hope, the quiet determination that had carried her through long days and lonely nights. It was a story that words could not convey, only sound could, and those who listened could feel it, even if they could not explain it. The laughter that had once seemed harmless now felt distant and inconsequential, replaced by an understanding that went deeper than any comment, deeper than any glance, as the final note lingered. Fading softly into silence, the cafe remained still for a heartbeat longer. Then, slowly, people began to move again. Conversations resumed, but they were different now. There was a new awareness, a new respect, a quiet acknowledgement of the power that had just been revealed. The group of customers who had laughed before looked at her with something they had never expected: genuine admiration. They whispered to each other, unsure of what to say. Their assumptions shattered. Her colleagues approached cautiously, their smiles hesitant but sincere. One reached out to touch her shoulder lightly, a silent gesture of apology and recognition. She smiled gently, nodding, understanding that this moment was bigger than words, bigger than explanations. She had shown them, without arrogance, that what they laughed at could hold immense value, that a single note played with truth could change everything. She returned to her work behind the counter, her hands moving with practiced ease, but inside, she felt different. Lighter, stronger, braver. She had faced laughter and doubt and had not only survived, but had transformed it into beauty. The memory of that first note, the shock in their eyes, the sudden silence, would remain with her forever. It was the beginning of something new, a door opened into a world that had been waiting for her all along. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the start. The moment stretched, almost suspended in time. The first note she had played lingered in the air like a delicate thread, connecting her heart to every person in the cafe. People's eyes were wide, mouths slightly open, a mixture of disbelief and awe painted across their faces. She looked around, noticing the stunned silence, feeling the shift in the room. Something had changed. The laughter, the doubt, the teasing, they were gone, replaced by attention, curiosity, and an unspoken respect. She could feel it, as if the space itself had shifted to make room for what was about to come. Her fingers hovered briefly over the keys, the weight of anticipation settling around her like a soft blanket. This was not a performance for applause, not a show to impress, but a moment of truth. She could no longer hide the music that had lived inside her for so long. Every evening she had spent writing, every night she had hummed in solitude. Every secret melody she had practiced, all of it led to this moment. She closed her eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and allowed herself to sink into the rhythm. She had imagined countless times in the quiet of her apartment. The next note followed the first. Richer, deeper, more intentional. It flowed effortlessly, connecting seamlessly with the one that had come before. Her hands moved with a confidence born from years of private practice, and the room seemed to respond. Customers who had been chatting before were now leaning forward, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Their conversation had stopped. Their laughter vanished, replaced by the sound of something pure and unexpected. Every note was a story, every chord a window into a world that had never known existed in the woman who had seemed so ordinary until now. She began to weave a melody. Slow at first, delicate, teasing the ears of those listening, drawing them in. The music filled the space, dancing between tables, drifting past the counter, brushing against the walls, and curling softly around the ceiling. It was more than sound. It was emotion, layered and complex, yet understandable by every heart in the room. People could feel it without naming it. Acquiescent recognition that what they were witnessing was extraordinary. Even the regulars, who had seen her every day without noticing, were captivated. They could not look away. They had underestimated her. And now they were paying the price of their assumptions. Her colleagues watched from the back, silent and wide-eyed. The young group of customers who had laughed moments before were frozen, unsure how to respond. They had thought this would be a joke, a momentary distraction. And now they were confronted with something that defied expectation. It was a simple piano, an ordinary cafe, and yet the music transformed it into a stage. The world outside had faded, leaving only the woman and the story she was telling through her fingers. Each note was intentional, precise, and yet free. Carrying with it the honesty of someone who had waited years to be heard, the melody began to grow in complexity, but never in a way that felt forced. She allowed herself to follow her instincts, letting her emotions guide her hands. There was tension, a hint of melancholy, a spark of hope, and a quiet joy that wrapped around each note like a warm embrace. The cafe had become a listening room, a temporary sanctuary where the worries of the outside world had no place. People were leaning closer to hear every nuance, catching the subtle shifts in tone, the pauses that spoke as loudly as the notes themselves. She could feel their attention, a tangible presence, but she did not falter. She let the music flow, knowing that this was her moment, her truth, and her gift. Time seemed to slow. She noticed a man sitting near the window, his coffee untouched, his eyes fixed on her. She could see the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way his lips parted slightly as if trying to grasp what he was hearing. She saw a young woman tapping her fingers lightly against the table, keeping time unconsciously, and an older man with tears glistening in his eyes. Each person was responding differently, yet all were united in the same awe, same disbelief, the same recognition of something rare and beautiful. She had always dreamed of this, yet the reality was even more profound than she had imagined. She shifted the melody, letting it rise and fall, ebb and flow like a gentle tide. Her fingers moved quickly now, almost dancing across the keys, but never losing the softness and clarity of the sound. There was a moment of quiet suspense, a pause that hung in the air before the next chord struck, resonant and commanding. It was as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for the next wave of sound. She was no longer just playing notes. She was telling a story of patience, of struggle, of silent dreams held close for fear of ridicule. And now, finally, the story was being heard. The young group of customers shifted in their seats, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Their initial amusement had turned into astonishment, their disbelief now tempered with respect. One whispered to another, unable to contain a sense of wonder that had replaced their earlier mockery. They had underestimated her, and they could feel it deeply. The lesson was not harsh, but it was undeniable. They had laughed too soon. They had judged without knowing. Now they were witnessing a truth that words could not capture. She allowed the music to soften again, delicate and intimate, almost like a secret shared between her and the listeners. Her eyes opened slightly, scanning the room. She could see faces softened, expressions changed, hearts stirred. Some were crying quietly, moved by the unexpected beauty of the moment. Some were smiling, tears mixing with laughter, realizing the gift they had been given. She did not need to see recognition in their eyes, yet it was there, in subtle ways. That filled the space around her with warmth as the melody continued. She introduced subtle shifts, minor chords that hinted at longing, major chords that suggested hope and triumph. She was telling the story of herself, yes, but also the story of anyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, laughed at, or told their dreams were foolish. Every note resonated with the courage it took to continue in silence, to practice alone, to believe in something unseen and unheard. And now, finally, that belief was breaking through the walls of doubt, transforming the ordinary cafe into a place of shared wonder. Her colleagues were now standing near the back, no longer whispering or making jokes, but simply watching in awe. They had known her as a quiet presence, someone who moved among them unnoticed. Now they realized how little they had truly seen. The music revealed a depth they had never imagined, a strength and artistry that had been quietly building for years. It was a moment of revelation, not only for the customers, but for those who had shared the daily grind with her. The ordinary had become extraordinary before their eyes. She played with controlled passion, allowing the notes to breathe and linger, giving space for the listeners to absorb the full impact. The melody rose and fell like a wave, sometimes strong and commanding, sometimes gentle and tender. It was a performance without intention of recognition, yet recognition came naturally. The room was filled not with applause yet, but with an almost reverent silence, collective holding of breath that spoke louder than words could. Each person present felt the music touch a part of them they had not expected to be reached, a reminder of the beauty hidden in unexpected places. The first note had shocked them, but the melody that followed cemented the truth. She was not ordinary. She was a storyteller, a creator, a woman who had turned every doubt, every laugh, every ignored moment into something profound. Each chord carried layers of emotion, each pause a moment for reflection. Her music was not meant to dazzle with speed or complexity alone. It was meant to speak, to connect, to reveal the human spirit in ways words often failed. She felt a sense of release as the music reached a quiet, satisfying conclusion. It was not a dramatic finale, but a gentle landing, a settling into peace. The room exhaled collectively, though not in unison. Some blinked, some wiped tears, some simply sat in stunned silence. The first note had drawn attention, but the melody that followed had captured hearts. She leaned back slightly, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her breathing steady. She did not need their words to know she had succeeded. She had spoken her truth, and it had been heard. People slowly began to move, hesitant at first, their conversation returning with soft murmurs and careful smiles. The group of young customers who had mocked her now looked at her with a mixture of respect and humility. Some approached cautiously, offering compliments, stammering slightly as they tried to find the right words. Her colleagues lingered, still absorbing the transformation they had witnessed. Regular customers offered nods and smiles, small gestures that carried weight after the intensity of the performance. She returned to her work behind the counter, calm and composed, but inside a quiet fire burned. This had been her moment of revelation, her first proof that the music inside her could transcend doubt and laughter as the cafe returned to normal. She felt the subtle changes in perception, both from others and within herself. She had been underestimated, laughed at, and ignored, but now she had proven, the most natural way, that talent and determination cannot remain hidden forever. She did not need to boast or explain. The truth had been spoken through sound, and sound had the power to convey what words often could not. She continued her day, but the weight of what had occurred lingered. A quiet joy, a sense of accomplishment, and a deepening understanding that her journey was only beginning. The cafe was quiet now, but the quiet was not empty. It was filled with something heavier, something more tangible than silence. It was the pause that came after something extraordinary had just happened. People were processing what they had witnessed, their minds trying to grasp the reality of what had seemed impossible just moments before. She sat at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, her chest rising and falling as she took in the moment. She had expected some reaction, of course, but the depth of the stillness, the intensity of the awe surprised her. This was different from applause or casual appreciation. This was something that reached deeper, a recognition of truth, of talent, of years lived quietly and faithfully in preparation for a moment like this. She could feel the subtle shift in the room. Conversations that had once been filled with laughter and light banter had stopped, placed by attentive gazes and thoughtful expressions. The group of young customers who had laughed at her just moments ago were no longer smirking or whispering. They were silent, leaning forward in their seats, their expressions a mixture of shock, awe, and newfound respect. Even her colleagues, who had known her daily routine, were struck by the transformation. They had seen her as quiet, unassuming, almost invisible. Now, they were witnessing a side of her that they could never have imagined: a strength, a talent, and an emotional depth that radiated from her being and through the music she had played. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel the energy of the room, to absorb the emotions that had shifted so dramatically in her presence. She felt a quiet smile tug at her lips, not from pride or arrogance, but from relief, from the satisfaction of finally being able to express what had lived inside her for so long. She had carried this music quietly, faithfully, through long days and lonely nights, often doubting whether anyone would ever hear it. And now, not only had they heard it, but it had resonated with them in ways she could not have imagined. She began to play again, softly this time, a gentle continuation of the melody she had started. The notes were delicate, intimate, almost like a whisper meant to reach the heart without overwhelming the listener. It was a different kind of power, subtle but undeniable, and she could feel the room leaning into it, absorbing it fully. People who had been skeptical, who had doubted her abilities, now leaned forward. Drawn by the authenticity and vulnerability in her music, it was not a performance meant to impress, but a story told through sound, a story of patience, of resilience, of dreams nurtured in silence. The music moved through the space, carrying with it layers of emotion. There were hints of longing, subtle undertones of sadness, flickers of hope, and moments of gentle joy. Every person in the cafe felt the music differently, yet all were connected by it. She noticed the older man near the corner tapping his foot lightly, a tear running down his cheek. The young woman by the window had her hands folded in her lap, her eyes closed, swaying slightly to the rhythm. Even the barista in the back, who had been too busy to notice earlier, had paused, caught in the spell of the melody. The music was touching something inside them, something unspoken and deeply human. She let her fingers move freely now, no longer restrained by hesitation or doubt. The melody expanded, filling every corner of the cafe, rising and falling like waves. She could feel the energy of the room responding, the emotions of the listeners feeding back into her performance. It was a dialogue without words, a connection that transcended language, culture, and expectation. Each chord was deliberate, yet spontaneous, a reflection of both skill and instinct. The music was alive, and through it, she was alive in a way that she had never been before in the presence of others. Some of the customers, who had come in expecting a casual visit, found themselves leaning closer to catch every nuance. Their earlier amusement had melted away, replaced by a sense of wonder that seemed almost tangible. They whispered softly to each other, questioning how someone so unassuming could create something so profound. They were not just hearing music, they were experiencing it, feeling the story woven into each note and realizing that they had misjudged her completely. The laughter that had once been directed at her now felt like a distant memory, replaced by an understanding of the power that had always existed quietly within her. Her colleagues were no longer just observers, they were participants in the moment, their expressions softening as they absorbed the performance. They had shared jokes at her expense in the past, unaware of the dedication and practice that had gone unseen. Now, seeing the impact of her music, they were confronted with the truth of her abilities. There was no resentment, only respect, and a dawning realization of how little they had truly known. It was a lesson in humility and recognition, and they accepted it silently, giving her the space to shine without interruption. The melody continued, shifting in tone and pace. There were moments of quiet reflection, where the notes lingered softly in the air, and moments of intensity, where the chords struck with clarity and force, capturing attention fully. She felt the room respond instinctively, the listeners leaning into each transition, their breath subtly matching the rhythm of her playing. It was a symbiotic experience, a shared journey where music became the bridge between her inner world and the reality of those around her. Each person absorbed it differently, yet all felt the same awe, the same recognition that something remarkable had just occurred. She noticed a few people wiping their eyes, moved by the raw honesty in the music. It was not meant to evoke tears deliberately, yet the authenticity of her performance could not be denied. There were no theatrics, no attempt to manipulate emotion, only the pure, unfiltered expression of her passion and talent. It was a revelation to those present, a reminder that beauty and skill often go unnoticed until given the chance to emerge. She had waited years for this opportunity. She seized it with grace and courage. As the melody reached a soft, contemplative conclusion, the room remained still for a heartbeat longer. No one moved, no one spoke, as if afraid to break the fragile spell that had been woven by her music. Then, gradually, small movements began, hands shifted in laps, heads nodded subtly, and eyes met briefly across tables. The connection lingered, a quiet acknowledgement that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The impact of the moment extended beyond the notes themselves, touching hearts and minds in ways words could not convey. Applause began slowly, hesitant at first, then grew steadily as more people joined in. It was not just polite clapping, it was genuine recognition, a collective expression of appreciation and amazement. Her colleagues stepped forward, some with smiles, some with eyes wide in disbelief, offering congratulations and praise. The young group who had laughed before approached cautiously, unsure how to respond, their previous arrogance replaced by admiration and a newfound respect. They offered words of apology, sincere and heartfelt, acknowledging that they had underestimated her completely. She received it all with quiet grace, nodding and smiling, understanding that this moment was not about proving anyone wrong, but about sharing the music that had always been hers. The energy in the cafe had transformed completely. What had begun as a typical afternoon of coffee and conversation had turned into a shared experience of wonder and emotion. People who had been strangers to each other were now united by the music they had just heard. Conversations resumed, but they were tempered with a sense of reverence, an awareness that something rare and beautiful had occurred. Even those who had been casual observers felt changed. Touched by the honesty and power of her performance, she returned to her duties behind the counter. Her movements calm and composed, yet inside she felt a quiet triumph. The music had spoken for her, carried her story into the hearts of those around her, and revealed the depth of her talent in a way that could not be ignored. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and underestimation, and had responded not with anger or confrontation, but with the most authentic expression of her skill and passion. The applause, the tears, the respectful smiles, they were all acknowledgments of her courage, her patience, and her dedication. In the hours that followed, people lingered longer than usual, savoring the lingering sense of awe and connection. Some returned for a second cup of coffee, some simply sat quietly, reflecting on what they had heard. She moved among them with quiet confidence, her demeanor unchanged, yet the room was transformed. She had not sought recognition or fame, only the chance to express the music that lived within her. And in doing so, she had created a moment that would linger in memory far longer than any casual conversation or passing encounter. As the day drew to a close, she packed up her notebook, cleaned the cafe, and prepared to leave. The memories of the afternoon remained vivid, a quiet glow that would carry her through the days ahead. She knew that her journey was just beginning, that there were more songs to play, more stories to tell, more hearts to reach. But in this moment, she allowed herself to savor the impact she had made, the respect she had earned, and the realization that the laughter of others had never defined her worth. She walked out into the city streets with a sense of quiet triumph, knowing that the music she carried inside her could change the way the world saw her, even if just for a moment. Even if just through a single note that had shocked everyone and revealed her truth. The next day, the cafe was quiet again, the usual hum of life returning, but things felt different. People who had been present during the previous afternoon carried a subtle change in their eyes, soft curiosity and newfound respect. The woman arrived early, as always, carrying her small bag and notebook. moving through the familiar streets that had witnessed her quiet routines for so long. She noticed the subtle glances, the polite nods, and faint smiles from strangers and neighbors. The first note she had played yesterday had left ripples that extended further than she could see. She felt a quiet warmth, knowing that something had shifted, not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. The cafe staff greeted her differently today. There was a lightness in their steps, a hint of pride. And even the manager approached her with a smile that carried genuine acknowledgement. They did not need to ask what had happened. They had witnessed it all. Their words were soft and sincere, simple acknowledgments of her talent, yet they carried the weight of understanding. They had laughed before, underestimated her, but now they were learning the importance of patience, of looking beyond appearances, and of recognizing quiet dedication. She accepted their words with calm humility, her smile gentle, not needing to boast or claim validation. The recognition was enough. The regular customers, too, seemed to linger a little longer, ordering extra coffee, staying for longer conversations, or simply observing the woman they had once overlooked. Some approached to say a few words, hesitant, almost shyly, as though unsure whether to break the boundary of their assumptions. They complimented her, spoke of the music, and shared how it had moved them, how they had felt unexpectedly touched, and how it had made them reconsider the way they judged others. Each conversation, each expression of appreciation was a small affirmation, not of fame, but of the impact of authenticity and dedication.